When we hear the term modern art, what immediately comes to mind? What images, if anything, present themselves to us? Can I have the first image, please, Deb? Might we think of paintings, say like this, that doesn't appear to have a subject? Or if it does have a subject, it's wrenched in such a way that the subject isn't recognisable. Or going into other art forms, might we think of music that doesn't have tunes, poetry that doesn't rhyme, novels that don't tell a story. Now that's a very kind of brutish broad brushing of a very large and diverse area of art and culture. But the point I'm making is that we have an automatic series of expectations and assumptions when we hear the term modern art that we don't have when we hear the term art. And there is a distinction between the two. That when we hear the term modern art, we expect in some way something that's perhaps alienating, abstract, confounding, not easily kind of understandable immediately. Okay, so how did modern art come about? Where did it come from? Well, the general narrative runs that it was an inevitable result of the fundamental and profound changes that Western civilization underwent, particularly in the areas of science, where science and the study and the specification of the study seem to be questioning the long-held notion of a God-centered universe. Also, the era of political upheavals and revolutions with supposedly revolutionaries, overthrowing monarchies, but also with the breakdown of empires in Europe and the rise of nationalism. And then, of course, the agricultural changes that resulted from the Industrial Revolution, where long-held traditions of agrarian and village life, interaction with the land, was changing as industrialization led to the growth of cities. So more and more people were migrating, thus losing their traditions and their way of life that they had known for a very, very long time. So these three things, basically, a God-centered universe with God's representative, the king or queen, the aristocracy, and then man, a kind of a serf, but connected to a very, very long and ancient folk tradition. All of this was thrown out, or at least thrown into question. And so the narrative goes, artists were perhaps compelled to find a new language, a new way of exploring this and reflecting the uncertainty, because the world had changed radically. Now there's a lot of truth in that, because art doesn't exist in a vacuum. It'll always, in some respect, reflect the age and the culture that's around it. But as always, when we're taking a kind of a historical view, there's a tendency to compress things, to put everything into bullet points, to wipe basically a lot of the nuances out. But also, if we think about how history might be written by the victors, it's easy to perhaps overlook or omit things that don't necessarily fit with the way we view the world today. We tend to kind of posthumously impose the ideals and the standards that we have on history. In that respect, we might want to look at what has been omitted or what has been played down. Now, in the development of modern art, there was an art movement originated in the late 19th century called Symbolism that played a central role in modernism, in early modernism. Many of the key figures of modern art were not themselves symbolists. They, like Pablo Picasso, started as symbolists but then became something else. Or else they were reacting directly against symbolism. It was very, very much the kind of predominant art form throughout Europe, particularly in France and England and Russia. Now the symbolists were responding to all of these changes, but in many ways they were reacting against them. The symbolists were, say, disturbed by the cult of utilitarianism and commerce and industry and the raising of money to being a kind of like a godlike status, the replacement of one kind of hierarchy with another one. And also the scientific process that seemed to be divesting the world and the universe of its mystery, its magic. And in specifying things, in separating all these components, breaking down the connections with things, what the poet Baudelaire referred to as the correspondences. The correspondences, the interconnected things, the interconnectedness of things. So the symbolists would have been, they would have been in some way reacting, rebelling against these things. So at this point, I'd like to just play a clip, just to provide a few examples of just some symbolist art. Okay, you just heard the opening to a piece of music by the French composer Claude Debussy, Prelude upon the Dijon Faun. It's a prelude to the Afternoon of the Faun. That was first performed in 1894, and it's generally cited as the first piece of bona fide modernist music. For many reasons. One is the opening, the flute melody, the sense of time signature and key signature is ambiguous. Now, the piece of music itself is inspired by a poem by a friend and contemporary of Debussy's, Stefan Mallarme. Yeah, this poem, The Afternoon of the Faun. Can we have the next image, please, James? This is a painting by the symbolist Arnold Brocklin of the faun whistling to the nightingale. In case anyone doesn't know what a faun is, it's this mythological creature. Part man but part goat. She's got goat's legs and horns. Don't think of the devil, think of Pan, or think of fairies, earth elementals, nature sprites. Think also as well of the potency of these beings in our culture. They seem to offer a mediating presence between the world of man and the world of nature. The faun, he's part man, but he's also part animal. So he's like a man, but he's more at peace with nature as well as his own nature. Now the faun, along with his female counterpart, the nymph, represent pure eros. They're erotic, sexual beings, but in a very kind of innocent way, because that's their nature. They're not troubled by the doubts and moral questions that humanity has. Now, in selecting a faun as the main character in his poem, Mallarme lets us know that the theme or the tenor of the poem is erotic. But everything particularly with the symbolists, is about suggestion and nuance. Very, very little, nothing in fact is made explicit. In the opening of the poem, the faun has been asleep in the woodland. And on waking, he sees, but he's not quite sure if it's a dream, he sees these nymphs. Now the suggestion there is that the faun has been asleep, and perhaps dreaming of nymphs, having an erotic dream, and has woken up in an aroused state. But none of this is stated, none of this is said. It's suggested. We're allowed to kind of, use our own imaginations. It remains within the confines of good taste as well, with that. But it's more than that, more than a question of kind of taste. Mallarme said to name an object is to suppress 3/4 of the enjoyment, to suggest that is the dream. Now say, for example, here's a railing, and I'm saying to you, this is a railing. That's a specific thing. It's fixed in your head, it's a railing. Whereas if I suggest a railing, all your kind of associations and memories about railings, when you've seen railings, what it might mean to you, are called into play. That's part of the purpose of having nuance and suggestion in art. It invites an interaction with you, the spectator. You draw upon your own memories and your own associations. It allows room for you. But what it also does, there's a line in a poem by a contemporary of Mallarme's, Paul Verlaine, and he says that nuance unites flute to the horn. So you're not dealing with a specific flute or horn, you're dealing with the unity of the music. You're dealing with the essence of the thing. And the essence of the thing isn't in the kind of fixed in the object, it's kind of suggested. And it seems to take place in your interaction with it. And this is a very, very powerful thing with art, because what this can do, what suggestion and nuance can do through this is, I'm sure most people have had that experience when they hear a piece of music or see a picture or something like that. There's a moment of recognition. You think, God, that really speaks to me. That really seems to be like my soul. Because it's suggested, because it's not specific, you see, it's not cordoned off. It allows you to respond to it, Now this is a very, very, I think, a very, very potent and wonderful thing, a key aspect of art. If we could have the next image, please, Tess. Now, to my mind, you could not get further from that ethos than with, say, a piece like this. This is, now don't laugh, this is art, it's very serious. This is an oak tree, yes, this is an oak tree, right? This is a piece by Michael McMartin called An Oak Tree. It's from 1973. Michael McMartin, here's an insight, he was a teacher as well. He taught many of the luminaries of the YBAs. The YBAs are the Young Brit artists. I think they're called the YBS or the Y-Bother, I'm not sure, that's another name. Anyway, so this is called An Oak Tree. Now I don't know if you can see exactly what it is. It's a shelf with a glass of water And beneath it is an explanation telling you precisely why it's an oak tree. Now, what the symbolist would do, like say what Mallarme or Debussy or Gogh would do, would present you with a work of art. It has a subject, but you're invited to interact with it. You're not confined in your appreciation of it to the subject. You know, you can have your own kind of reverie and interact with it. What this gives you is, well, it gives you nothing. It's very, very hard to see this as being anything other than a shelf and a glass of water, because there's no alchemical process going on. The shelf and the glass of water haven't, through art or craft, been turned into anything. But it doesn't even allow you the negative space to contemplate it. It feels that by giving you an explanation of precisely, specifically why this is an oak tree. This is a very, very different thing entirely. Now what happens here, and what happened at some stage in the 20th century, and this is something I'm going to be returning to a couple of times, is the work of art, the content, was absolutely replaced by the context, what we say it's about. You see, because the thing is, where's the work of art? Well, the content of this doesn't matter. It's all the context, it's the explanation. Another part of this process was removing our attention from the work of art to the artist, and therefore the cult of personality. Not looking at the art, but what about the artist? What's going on? You know, what does this say about the artist? This whole thing. Now, if the next image, please, Tess. Oscar Wilde, he said, what did he say? To reveal art and conceal the artist is art's aim. Essentially, that the artist is a cipher or a conduit for art, for kind of universal feelings and sensations. The artist gives them form. But the artists themselves, their ego and their kind of like, you know, pettiness and what have you, should get in the way. No, it's kind of like, it's a sad, I think it's quite sad that most people are far more familiar with Oscar Wilde's biography than they are with his work, because I think he was a great writer, you know. The same actually applies to, I mentioned Paul Verlaine, that symbolist poet. He had, at the time, a very scandalous life. I'm not going to go into the scandalous life because that's part of the problem. What remains, you see, is his poetry. But you see, the whole cult of personality thing means that we're not looking at the art, we're looking at the personality. But mentioning Verlaine and mentioning Oscar Wilde, I can talk about something that's commonly associated with symbolism, and certainly with European culture around that time. And that's the cult of decadence, or the decadent. Now, when I hear the term decadent these days, I tend to think of some kind of, you know, vacuous, disgustingly rich celebrity buying diamond-studded diapers for their babies. You know, this kind of really, the embodiment of a very crass celebration of money and ostentatious spending and wealth. Now, that would have been anathema to the decadent symbolists, because they would have seen that as the elevation of money. Like Oscar Wilde said, people know the price of everything, the value of nothing. Is the elevation of this. But also the decadent symbolists are a little bit like, at least I think, a little bit like the cynic who's essentially a wounded romantic. You know, the idealist who has high ideals but who's constantly thwarted and hurt by life and disappointed, so therefore adopts a veneer or adopts a persona as a space between themselves and the real world. And for the decadent symbolists, it would have been kind of completely immersing themselves in aesthetic concerns, in concerns with art and beauty and what have you, but also, of course, the sensual indulgence. But the difference is the indulgence isn't for the sake of it, it's in order to see the effect that it has on you. So it's actually very, very aware of consequence. And there's two novels that, for me, really explore and embody and say a lot about this very, very well. One is by Oscar Wilde, The Picture of Dorian Gray. And the other is by a Dutch-French writer, J.K. Huysmans, called Au Rebours, which translates as Against the Grain. Now, the painting of Dorian Gray, the picture of Dorian Gray, we're told at the beginning of the book, the artist Basil Hallward sees this painting as being the result of an ideal he's been striving after all his life, that is, to have the outer mirroring the inner. Dorian's good looks at the start of the book are essentially a reflection of his personality and his soul. He starts as a very, very kind, sweet, decent young man. And the artist Basil Hallward sees this as an ideal, this is something that's very, very important he's been working towards. It's what we now call the outer, the winter of the soul. It's something that Wilde believed and wrote a lot about, that the outer manifests something that's going on the inside. But where Dorian goes askew is he puts the superficial, he essentially puts his vanity before this. And he curses the painting when he's made to realise that the painting will remain youthful and what have you, where he will kind of age and what have you. He curses the painting, and firstly for want of a better term, he sins against life. He sins against the idea that there are consequences, and the consequences will show on our faces, they'll show in our eyes of our actions and what we do. But he also sins against art because he puts his vanity, he puts his own kind of youthful vanity in front of, in importance, a work of art. Now, the fact that the painting is a record of his soul, not so much of his aging, is indicated very, very early in the book when, having met and believed himself to fall in love with this beautiful young actress, Sybil Vane, Dorian rejects her. And the reason why he rejects her is Sybil Vane, having experienced genuine love, she has really fallen in love with Dorian. She renounces acting. She has no interest in the artificial. The artificial, forget it. But that's what he's interested in. He is interested in the artificial. He has no interest in the real Sybil Vane. So he rejects her, and she's crushed. And Wilde describes it painfully. He describes like little Sybil sobbing on the floor and her little hand reaching out, and Dorian utterly cruel and just dismissing her. And he leaves, and poor Sybil commits suicide. He goes home, looks at the painting. It isn't that the painting is aged, is that it becomes evil. It's still this like good-looking young man smiling, but the smile is cruel, and the eyes are mocking. He has sinned, you see, finally against love, not just romantic love, but compassion, pity, empathy, and responsibility. And so the pattern is set for him, thinking that he can get away with a life without consequence, which of course he can't. Because by the end of the book, despite him having all the, what would be considered in kind of celebrity culture, the trappings of success, he has youth, good looks, and money, he's in despair. He meets this young girl, and he reflects bitterly. She knows nothing, but she has everything that he has lost. All that innocence, all that goodness, the capacity to have a useful life. So in despair, he stabs the painting, whereupon he withers, he turns into an old man, and rots, falls down dead on the floor, and the painting returns to its former glory. Now, Wilde was immensely influenced by the other book I mentioned, Against the Grain. And in Against the Grain, there's only really one character, this chap Debussy. He's this aristocrat, and he's withdrawn entirely from the world, so doesn't have any interaction with people. In fact, he's got two elderly servants, and he doesn't even see them, they just leave his food, and he just goes off and, he indulges in his fantasies and his aesthetic concerns. And we're given a very, very brief description of how he got to that stage at the beginning of the book. As a kind of a sensed and refined young man, he's never been able to meet like-minded people or people of a similar kind of almost hysterical kind of sensitivity. So he indulges entirely then in kind of sexual debauches. Very little of which is actually mentioned, with just that he had kind of like perverse passions. But anyway, none of this has worked out very, very well for him, because by the end of the book, one of the reasons why he's withdrawn entirely is he's incapable of stimulus, he's incapable of dealing with people. He's impotent in absolutely every way. And he ends the book in despair, hoping against hope that he can believe in God and thus another world, as he's found this world, he can't live in it. Now, both of these novels were considered highly immoral at the time. Despite the fact that they're cautionary tales, neither of the main characters end up in an enviable position. You see, the consequences of their actions destroy them. There is consequence. This is the thing. But we're not titillated because, especially in the picture of Dorian Gray, Dorian's kind of sins, they don't mention them really. It's all suggestive, it's all nuance, suggestion. But at the same time, neither book provide us with a kind of a false, pious morality. They're presented realistically. People wouldn't actually pursue these paths if they weren't in some way tempted by them. Then as now, there's this huge gulf between our morals, our desire to do the right thing, and our appetites, our temptations. I remember reading recently that there's a bit of software that people can get, people who are addicted to online pornography. They put this software on their computer, and if they go to porn sites, I can't remember, see that their name appears on a database, or emails are sent to everyone on their contact list, I'm not sure. But essentially the point I'm making is, these people are trying to do the right thing. They're trying not to stay away from something, but obviously they feel they can't do it themselves. And whilst this gulf remains, and I think like so many of the things in this world we're in, these things are diametrically opposed, and they're kept that way so that there can't be an adult and grown-up and sensible conversation about things, only shouting, with only kind of like, say, the kind of tabloid of historical morality on one hand, and kind of like pornographers and pimps and kind of like sleazy characters on the other hand. It can't be resolved. And it means that we have to maintain a kind of a very, very false sense of the, or maybe not so much a false sense, but that we're left in a place that we can't actually, we're frightened of our appetites, we're frightened of the kind of like, even, oh, I'm going to have too much to drink or something like that, these urges. Now, the interesting thing about both of these books is, they do a very interesting thing, and it's a very rare thing these days. They present something and they allow us to make up our own minds. You know, we're not being lectured to, we're not being manipulated, we're not being titillated, or kind of like pushed into taking one viewpoint. So like, there it is, you're adult, make an opinion, think for yourself. Can we have the next image, please? Now, in 1891, J.K. Huysmans published this book, Là-bas, which translates as down there, though it's sometimes called the damned. It's largely concerned with Satanism in Paris at the time. And it's got a kind of a feverish description of a black mass towards the end of the book. Now, Huysmans appeared to be he appears to be playing a bit of a cat and mouse game, suggesting that he had insider knowledge of Satanism. We don't know that, but we do know that he was associated with many prominent occultists. And don't mistake the occult for satanic. I mean, occult merely means hidden or secret. And secret doesn't necessarily mean secret society. I mean, this was long before the repeal of the witchcraft laws. So if your spiritual or religious interests didn't fall into, like say, the book, the good book, whatever, that was it, you're a witch, you're a heretic, or you would be prosecuted at the very least. But there was nothing unusual about Huysmans having an interest in this, because, funnily enough, despite, or perhaps because of the cult of materialism at the time, the late 19th century saw a great flourishing and interest in all things spiritual, all things occult. I mean, this was the era of, like, say, spiritualism, the holding of seances, the establishment of theosophy, the rise of neo-paganism, say, in England, and organisations like the Order of the Golden Dawn, or the Nordic neo-paganism in, like, say, Germany, in no small part inspired by the operas of Richard Wagner. It was a time of great interest in these things. Now, Huysmans himself said something, if I can find it. He said, "It was through a glimpse of the supernatural of evil that I first obtained insight into the supernatural of good." Huysmans became a devout Catholic, and before you think, oh, Catholic would look like that, I'd ask you to just think of what Catholicism would have meant to him back then, because this is when it would have been perhaps the church militant, the existence of the devil was never doubted, blah, 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 blah. And this was also long before Vatican II, with the Mass was held in Latin. It was an act of high magic, essentially, culminating in an alchemical process whereby the transubstantiation, the bread and water, of the bread and wine is converted into flesh and blood. It's high magic, but I think that if he did have an insight into, say, a genuinely diabolical force, that it scared him perhaps to what he would have seen to be the other side. Now, Oscar Wilde converted to Catholicism towards the end of his life. It's commonly dismissed as a sort of a deathbed conversion, as if that means nothing, But I mean, he had been teetering several times on the brink of converting to Catholicism. I mean, one can see why with his aesthetic interests, coming from a kind of a more sedate Protestant background, he would have been drawn to the opulence of the Catholic, litany and Mass and all the kind of like candles and, the censers and incense and things like that. But it wasn't as superficial as that. I mean, Wilde said the supreme vice is shallowness. And I would say that almost all of his fiction, and his kind of like famous funny utterances, there's a lot of humour, but there's a lot of pathos, and there's a lot of sadness, and there's a sense of spiritual yearning. But that's been ironed out. You see, Wilde isn't generally regarded like that by both those who pillory him or praise him. Both tend to iron out the contradictions, the bits that don't fit. I mean, this is what happens with time anyway, but it's what happens with the dead. They can be used to fulfill or fit whatever agenda we want. I mean, I can't remember, it's a long time since I saw that film with Stephen Fry cast as Oscar Wilde, even though he just appeared to be playing Stephen Fry as far as I can see. Edit that without But, I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, I don't remember mentioning Oscar Wilde's Catholicism or his interest in the spiritual and the supernatural. But that's hardly surprising considering Mr. Fry's, occasionally expressed an opinion, funnily enough. I've heard tell that he has problems with Catholicism and all things New Age and spiritual. But essentially Wilde is dead. And as far as I know, he's dead. Once he remains dead, he remains unable to kind of set the record straight or say about this or that. We have the next image, please, Ted. This is a painting by Edward Manet, who, as far as I know, is also dead. And whilst he remains dead, he can't tell us what his intentions were with this painting en bar of Folie Berger, at the bar of Folie Berger. Now, when I was in art school, rather than they used to teach art history, whereas when I was at art school they didn't teach art, actually they didn't teach, so, okay. But instead of teaching, they had something called visual culture. And the first term of visual culture was devoted to a subject called gender and the gaze. And it used this painting in the first lecture, in the first discussion. The gender and the gaze. So there's the young woman, there's a mirror behind her so she can be seen from all angles, and there in the corner is the male gaze. That's the funniest thing, I probably saw this painting hundreds of times and I never figured out that's what it's actually about. But there you go. I learned something at university. Now, in case you don't get it, this is Frankfurt School, identity politics, blah, blah, blah. The majority of the pupils, you see, were, 80% of the pupils would have been young girls. So, it's all about your victim status and blah, blah, blah. And I said to the tutor at the time, 100 years ago, you would have said, you would have used the Marxist kind of class struggle thing, that she's the proletarian imprisoned behind the counter, and there's the top-hatted bourgeoisie purchasing her because she's another commodity, blah, 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 blah. The whole point is, you can say anything about, anyone can come up with an explanation about what this painting means. There's some alcohol, there's some oranges. If you're going to drink, have some vitamin C. I don't have a healthy complexion like this young girl. You can say anything you want, right? Anyone can have an opinion. What very few people can do is paint this picture. So, context. Everyone can do context. Content, that's a bit more tricky. With the next shot, please, cheers. Okay, this is another painting by Edward Manet, Le Déjeuner sur l'heure, Lunch on the Grass. This is from 1863, and this is commonly cited as one of, if not the, one of the first modernist paintings. The reason being that the nude girl is sitting with these men who are dressed in what was then contemporary clothing. You see, the nude has long been part of the kind of Western canon of art, but in mythological setting. Think of, say, the Birth of Venus by Botticelli, with the nude coming out of a clam. But the fact that she's sitting with these men in what was then contemporary dress tells us, or told the viewing public at the time, that this isn't a mythological painting. Also, look at her gaze. She's not shy, she's not demure, she's staring out. Quite comfortable, quite assertive. No, this was immensely, this was really, really controversial at the time and caused a lot of bother. There was a lot of hue and cry about the morality of the painting. This is terrible, this is the end of civilization, blah, 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 blah. A lot of hue and cry, a lot of tumult and shouting, a lot of sound and fury that's gone. The reason why it's gone? All those people are dead. Well, with them, so dies the context. That's no longer relevant. It's gone, over. But what remains is the painting. Now we can look at the painting, we can regard it on purely aesthetic terms. Can we have the next image, please, Tess? In contrast, this is somewhere I've got it here. Yes, Work 227, The Lights Going On and Off, by Martin Creed. Some of you must remember this. It caused a scandal in 2001. It won the Turner Prize, which is not only kind of an insult to that great artist's name, but it's, a handy way of getting £20,000 and getting a reputation. Now, I should be fair to Mr. Creed, this is a photograph, so we're not actually experiencing the reality of the light going on and off. We have to use our imaginations. Okay. Now here's what this chap, the Tate Gallery's communications curator. Does anyone know what that means? Communications curator. You ring up the Tate, hello, is this Tate Gallery? Sorry, we can't speak to you, because that's communication, and all communication needs to be curated by this fella. It just doesn't make sense, but he gets paid for it anyway, so there we go, everyone's winning. Right? Simon Wilson, this is the man. The Tate Gallery's communications curator said, Creed has said we live in a world full of objects. He wants to make art that doesn't contribute to that clutter. He wants to make art where he is doing as little as possible that is consistent with doing something. So there you have it. Okay. Now, it's very easy to look at this and say, well, this is nothing, this is non-art. No, don't make any mistake. This isn't passive non-art. This is active anti-art. This is destructive. And the reason why is, when we're all dead, when this context is gone, what remains? Nothing. You see, when Mania is dead, all those artists, what we used to call a tradition, the canon, they're dead, but the work remains. This is a kind of a legacy, and you can draw upon this. When we're all gone, the next generation, they go to the reading of the will, what they get? Fuck you, nothing. This is deliberate, because this replaces bona fide art. It doesn't sit alongside bona fide art, it replaces it. And as so, this is the equivalent of burning books or desecrating sacred spaces. It's active, don't mistake it for a passive thing. So, okay, this now again, context has entirely replaced content. Now, the cult of personality, taking our attention from the work of art and putting it onto the artist, has played a central role as well in getting us to even tolerate something like this, by distracting us. And there's one artist who I think has particularly been used in this process.
Sorry.
Could I have the next?
It's not a stun gun.
But it will feel like one. Yeah.
Depends how much we like you.
Okay, in case you don't recognise him, it's Vincent van Gogh. Anyone here hadn't heard of Vincent van Gogh? Anyone here hasn't heard of the story of Vincent van Gogh's life, not selling any paintings, cutting off a bit of his ear, killing himself? You all know that? Why? Why does everyone know about Vincent van Gogh? Why is it that everyone knows about him and not, say, Picasso or one of his contemporaries? Well, it's his painting. Now, I think he's a very, very good painter. I think this is an excellent portrait. Could I have the next image, please, Ted?
Yeah.
This is an earlier piece by him from 1885. I just included to show that he wasn't this historical madman fleeing paint. He could paint in a very measured, controlled style. He was a good craftsman. He had that. Could we have the next image, please, Ted? Of course, he's more familiar with this story line, It's a really, really lovely painting. It's very, very good. I value it. But I don't believe for one moment that it's because of his painting alone that he has attained such incredible posthumous success. Okay, so is it his life? Is it the Van Gogh story? Most people are aware of it in some capacity. And it is very, very moving, especially with the letters between himself and his brother, Theo. Here's a very, very a beautiful spirit, a very good-hearted person who's constantly being thwarted and disappointed by life. The madness thing is overplayed. It's believed that he had an acute form of epilepsy and had seizures and twitches. And because he had these seizures and twitches, people laughed at him. So a lot of his solitude came from not being able to. He couldn't sell himself. I mean, it's interesting actually because his brother was an art dealer in Paris. So he should have had contacts, but he couldn't. He couldn't sell himself. He couldn't do the fake thing, networking and stuff like that. He went off into the south of France to just paint instead. Could we have the next image, please, Tess? Now, towards the end of his life, he went and visited. That's all right. Towards the end of his life, he went and visited his brother and his sister-in-law, and they just had a baby. And obviously, they were keeping him because he wasn't selling any paintings. His health was going. Things were really, really closing in for him, and he felt that he was a burden. And this is one of the last paintings he did, Wheatfield Crows. We see a path that goes nowhere, and here come the crows that are descending. Essentially, it's over for the poor man. He knows there's really nowhere for him to go. And this is very, very tragic, but it's hardly unique. I mean, for every Van Gogh you hear about, there's 1,000 you don't. And a significant number of them will look at the vast disparity between Van Gogh's failures in his life and his success in death and think, well, maybe that's it, maybe I have to die, Because after all, what does Van Gogh's story tell us? Well, from a personal experience, what does Van Gogh's story tell you as an artist? When I was in art school, rather than allotting studio space, as you'd imagine, sensibly measured, everyone gets the same space. What they did was this: your name would appear on a list in a particular place, and you have to go and fight for your space. You'll go and search yourself, get the best space possible. And I said to a tutor, this is really, this is terrible. And he said, look, they're not your classmates, they're competition. This is the fucking real world. You've got to be aggressive. Oh, what, you want to paint the stars? No, that's over, forget it. Sensitive, forget it. Also, when we had crits, when you'd have at the end of term, when you'd explain your work to a tutor, you'd constantly get this question: yes, but what context do you put it in, or how would you contextualize your work? What this means is, what pre-existing, that is proven, because we've heard of them, that is successful, what pre-existing model, be it an artist or an art movement, do you attach yourself to parasitically? Because you go after the winning model. It's been proven, we've heard of it, so that's what you go after. Oh, what, you want to follow your heart and visions? Forget it, it is over. That's over. You'll end up like Van Gogh. Nobody wants that. And what does Van Gogh's story tell the public? Well, the darker the emotion, the deeper the emotion. The more suffering you have, the more pain, the more real it is, the more authentic. Of course, pain and suffering is part of life, but it's not the whole story. But what it tells us is that, I know something I've seen on the rare occasion where I've seen The X Factor or something like that, and they also think there's always this sob story. They think, I want to do this because my cat got sick or something. So it's because that makes it real, because I feel the pain, and the pain makes me poetic. The pain just makes you human. Get over it. But it's that we think that something has to be dark, it has to be painful and full of suffering. And we have a certain amount of that, yes. But what it says, centrally, it says that the art is confounding or alienating. So, you're at, the Turner Prize exhibition or Tate Modern, you see a pile of bricks, you see a light going on and off, you see a pile of, a dirty bed or a kind of shit. Before you say, this is rubbish, you just might think, I don't know, people didn't get Van Gogh in his time either, maybe I just don't understand it. And into that, you'll have an army of curators and critics and academics who, let's be frank, whose livelihood depends upon their convincing you that it's not just a pile of bricks or a kind of shit or a dirty bed and so on. This is all, this isn't actually by accident, this is by design. But what it does is there's a big gulf of alienation between the spectator, and this is actually the opposite to what I started with, the Symbolist experience when you're invited into a work of art. This is the opposite, you're alienated from it. Could I have that little clip now, please, Dad? You just heard the opening to the violin concerto by the Austrian composer Arnold Schoenberg. I feel a bit guilty about actually including him with those, what I consider quite ugly paintings, but that's very much the milieu he was operating within, Expressionism. Now, you may not like that music, you may find it alienating, unmelodic, whatever. That's fine, you're entitled to your opinion. I'm personally not a great fan of Schoenberg's music myself. What I would argue with anybody is that it is art. It is art. Schoenberg was an artist and it is art. And one of the reasons why I would consider that art is that it can't be faked. Consider it. You get a canvas, fling paint at it. I'm a painter. There we go. Who can argue it? You're a painter, I would get a digital camera, not, it takes certain amounts of talent and intelligence, but it takes years of an immense amount of time, effort, energy, and discipline in familiarizing yourself with composition, harmony, and blah, 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 blah. It's a complex process. And whether you like it or not, what it does, like other bona fide modernists, like say, late James Joyce, it holds up a hand to all the fakers, all the charlatans, all the expedient merchants who would otherwise be putting piles of bricks and having lights flashing on off, because it's hard work. It's very much hard work. Because it's a lot of hard work, and you're almost guaranteed that nobody will want to listen to it. Because the difference between, say, something like the music of Schoenberg and the kind of like the last two novels of James Joyce is they make immense demands on your attention. It's difficult, it's not easy. But what you can arguably say is that they are full of content. You will get something out of it. Whether you like it or not, whether you like it, that's a subjective view. Objectively, I consider them worthy because I do consider them full of content. Now, I remember reading an interview with Nicholas Soroja. He's now Sir Nicholas Soroja, the curator of Tate Modern. And he was basically saying that the sheer number of people visiting the gallery every day was evidence that the public now got modern, they got modern art, they understood, blah, 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 that's it, it's worked, hey, great, everyone's got modern art. Right. It could also be, in my opinion, people visiting Tate Modern because people like to do something. It's a day trip, you're in London, let's go to the London Eye, let's go to the 92 shows. Or let's go to Tate Modern, and you can then, you've got you can convince yourself that you're having a cultural experience that way. It appeals to your vanity, you see, and you can walk there and say, this is very interesting. I find it very interesting, isn't it? And you can talk to your friends at the pub afterwards, this is very interesting, until you get drunk and talk about stuff that you're actually interested in. It asks nothing of you, it demands nothing of you. You can walk around gawping at all of this stuff. There's nothing, because there is actually nothing there. But what it does give you is it appeals to your vanity. It appeals to your sense of self-esteem. I'm an urbane, sophisticated person. I understand modern art. Unlike, because, if you're having to listen to Schoenberg or read James Joyce, it's incredibly demanding. It's hard work. This is why I have an admiration for those bona fide modernists, because it can't be faked. It demands too much. But I wonder at the amount of people who go to Tate Modern, and I very, very, very much doubt, and I would probably argue it with most of them, that they are going there for an artistic and aesthetic experience rather than vanity. You see, they go to the National Gallery, which, as far as I'm aware, is still free, and it's croaking at the seams with fantastic paintings. But there's no kudos in that. There's no kudos in standing in front of a Titian or a Manet or something and saying, well, that's really, really good. Because anyone can see that. You see, that doesn't appeal to your sense of cool, your sense of being kind of in some way elect and without actually having to make the effort for it. But on the point of cool, we're going to pause and take a break, and I should be talking a bit about cool in the second half. So anyway, thanks very much for listening.